Hello, everyone, and welcome back for the ninth edition of the Suits and Laterals podcast in the year 2015. We're through 4 weeks of NFL play, and to break it all down for you on and off the field, as we do here at Suits and Laterals, you got me, Jeff Rich, and you got Chris Green on the other end of the mic there. And Chris, what's going on?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I had a little bit of fun this weekend.
I heard it, except for the ending.
Well, to fill everybody in, we're talking about the Cleveland Browns. It was my second game in 4 weeks, which is a little bit of an anomaly for me. As some of you know, I saw the Browns defeat the Titans 28-14 in week 2 of the NFL season. Not the same result in San Diego in week 4. The San Diego Chargers come out on top 30-27 with a Josh Lambo successful field goal on his second try. The Browns weren't satisfied with him missing as the clock ran out to force the game into overtime. I don't think the Browns felt like playing football anymore, or at least Tramon Williams did not. Jumping off sides, Lambo nails the second kick. The Chargers get the walk-off win. And their fans got to be pretty happy with the 2-2 start, considering how bad it could be, considering that they almost lost, and almost losing is still winning. They almost lost to the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns, and it doesn't work out that way. Then, the Chargers salvage a 2-2 start through 4 games. As for the Browns, they fall to 1-3, and drama surrounds them. As always, not only with the losses, and it just, same old Browns is right. It's always something. It's bad enough that they lose on the field. They lose off the field too. You have to hear the never-ending saga of the quarterback, and this starts way before they draft Johnny Manziel, way before they play him too early in his rookie season, and way before he plays well enough anyway, and takes over for Josh McCown, and then finds his way back to the bench. And Josh McCown has since gone 0-2, but you can't put those losses squarely on the shoulders of Josh McCown.
He ain't playing defense.
No, and isn't that the problem? And isn't that what the Browns were supposed to do? Bringing in Mike Pettin, a Rex Ryan guy, a defensive guy, to right the ship on defense and kind of go against the grain of everything that's been happening in the NFL, where you're throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game. The Browns, on paper anyway, or at least in the pressers, they seem to be committed to running the football and stopping the run. They're throwing it a lot more than they're running it. They're not running it extremely well. I think that they did a little bit better against the San Diego Chargers last Sunday, but they're not stopping the run at all. And on paper, they've got pretty good talent in the middle of the field with Danny Shelton up front, with Carlos Dansby, the 0-time Pro Bowler, but still a great athlete. And Chris Kirksey in his second year, he's really earned that starting spot. I think that it's on the outside when they didn't have Craig Robertson in week 4. Barkevius Mingo is just not the answer. And they've signed free agents. They've used draft picks on front 7 guys, and they just can't make it stick. And then their secondary, and they were
the best secondary in the league.
And maybe they are. You know what? To be fair, Joe Hayden got eaten up by Amari Cooper in week 3. And the excuse was that his ribs were bothering him. Maybe the finger was already bothering him in week 3. And then week 4, you end up with Phillip Rivers with enough time to eat a sandwich in the pocket. And
that's pathetic.
He exploited matchups. Some of the Browns thought that, I think it was Tramon Williams, that thought that Phillip Rivers knew every one of their defensive schemes and just tore them apart. Tayshaun Gibson looked like he got banged up a little bit, so he wasn't on his A game. And Dante Whitner forced into pass coverage on, the Chargers didn't even have Antonio Gates. I mean, they were losing to Ladarius Green, and Melvin Gordon, had some nice runs, but it wasn't Melvin Gordon. It was Danny Woodhead that beat them up. So Lots to just sigh and shake your head at with the Cleveland Browns. On the other side of the ball, the Chargers look like they've got a little bit going on. I got into it with our mutual friend Josh Flagner on Twitter this morning about the Chargers as a playoff team. I don't see it. I think that they've beaten two bad teams and they were very lucky to do so.
Well, okay. So real quick on the defensive end. Number one, the Chargers were without 3/5 of their starting line. And the Browns weren't getting they had some pressure in that first series, but then San Diego spread them out, and that was the end of that. And the rest of the game, like you said, he was back there long enough to have a drink, make a sandwich, take a nap, whatever. They just didn't touch him then, which is, there's no excuse for that when you have this vaunted defensive line that they've spent all this money on these free agents and they've made these high draft picks and they can't touch the quarterback. The linebackers, Dansby's fine. I don't have any issue with him. Kirksey is up and down. The rest of the linebacking core is a joke. Mingo, the guy didn't deserve to be a top 10 pick in the first place, and he has done nothing to show that he has since then. But that's the same old story with the drafting, and I'm not going to get into that disaster because it's historically written and everybody knows about it. On the offensive side of the ball, they can't run the ball. They can't protect the quarterback, and that's even scary too. Back-to-back weeks, the Raiders and now the Chargers come in with no sacks and worse defense against the run other than the Browns. And the running game was a little bit better, but every time McCown turned around, somebody was in his lap. At some point, you got to wonder what the heck's going on with this team. It seems like they've regressed from last year. I'll be honest. I think last year they overachieved to get 7 wins, despite the way the season finished. I don't think they were really a 7-win team. I think they masked a lot of things. But I don't know about you, but this team looks very undisciplined this year compared to last year. And that's kind of surprising and disappointing all in the same time. I don't know if it's because of the issues with the offensive line coach who was let go last week, Andy Moeller, or the new offensive coordinator. But, they shouldn't be having these kind of issues on defense because nothing changed on that side of the ball. But it's just – I don't know what to say. I like Mike Pettine as coach, but they can't keep regressing and him expect to keep his job. And I hate saying that because I'm sick of them changing coaches every year or every other year.
I think you nailed it right there. I think people like you and I want Mike Pettine to be even if he's not necessarily the guy to take him to the next level, but we just want him to be a guy.
Yeah.
And it's just not happening.
As opposed to a footnote.
Right. And that's, we've got a long list of coaches. We can put the famous Tim Couch jersey with all the pieces of masking tape with the 21 different starting quarterbacks on it is one thing, but we could put together like an old Marty Schottenheimer trench coat with the old, with the Cleveland Browns helmet on the patch on the sleeve and just put names and tape starting with Chris Palmer and going down to Mike Pettine and putting question marks for whoever the next guy might be. Pettine has mishandled some things. The Browns had to play with Pierre Desser on one side of the ball, Tremont Williams on the other. They were without K'Wan Williams, and the reason that they were without Joe Hayden caused some controversy this week. Let
me cut in on that.
Okay,
this wouldn't be a controversy if they were winning games. But because they continue to lose, these type of things become big stories.
Still, a head coach shouldn't throw his, one of his number one players under the bus, and that's the unfortunate thing about the saga of the Cleveland Browns. One thing, Pettine says that Hayden shouldn't play, and the NFL's investigating the Browns for lack of integrity on the injury report. Some players that didn't play that weren't injured, throughout this 4-game stretch, 2 of the 3 losses, the Browns got to face the Jets without Sheldon Richardson. They got to face the Chargers without Antonio Gates. And there's just a slew of players that were suspended before the season began, missing 4 games that we're going to see in week 5. I think that, obviously Gates is of note. He's Phillip Rivers' favorite target. Phillip Rivers is committed to the Chargers long term. So that's going to help out there. I mean, does that turn them from a 2-2 team into AFC West champions or wild card team?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at Gates' production last year, he kind of went down. So he's had a lot of injuries over the years and stuff. So I think he's on the downside of career at this point. I could be wrong. Maybe the 4 games out will actually help him. He'll come in and be healthier and have a good season. But he's not going to make a big enough of a difference. I mean, they have a lot of injuries already. As I mentioned, the 3/5 of the offensive line's out. They're missing some defensive starters. So there's a lot going on there. And else, not to mention they lost, 2 receivers in the game against the Browns too. So I don't know how long those guys are going to be out, but that all plays into it. I think San Diego is one of those teams that's going to be borderline at best. I mean, I think their high end's probably 9-7, and I just don't know if that's good enough to make the playoffs.
What do you think of the Chiefs out there in the West? They're 1-3, but they've got some really bad beats. That Denver game was a disaster. Cincinnati might just be a really good team. This is a Chiefs team that I think really has a chance to recover from this start. Just tough schedule. They lost.
Yeah, they've had a tough start. They've been the anti-Browns as far as the beginning of the schedule.
Because they wiped the floor clean with the Texans in week 1, but they just ran into a buzzsaw with Green Bay. They had the unfortunate occurrence with with Denver. This is a team that I can honestly see bouncing back. I don't have a lot of faith in that Andy Reid, Alex Smith combo, but if they can play from ahead and not have to worry about those fourth quarter comebacks, because you don't know any fourth quarter comebacks from Alex Smith, because there probably hasn't been one. The Chiefs are one of those teams that I like, but more on these suspensions. The Dallas Cowboys, they find themselves at 2-2, counting on Brandon Weeden. They lost another running back from their running game that was already decimated, but their problem's not Weeden. They're without Dez Bryant, which doesn't help when you're playing with a backup quarterback, but they're giving up tons of points, and they go from being, a 2-0 team cruising in the fourth quarter against the Falcons to, finding themselves at 2-2 now. They're going to get a little bit of help. A lot of controversy surrounding Greg Hardy, suspended for violating the league's personal conduct policy. And, they're going to get Rolando McClain back. And you and I were talking before we started recording this evening about how McClain's maybe not a big name, other than, his high status coming out of Alabama. He's walked away from the game for fear that, he was just going to become a worse and worse human being. And he seems to have rebounded. He's at least staying on the roster with the Cowboys. But Greg Hardy is going to put some pressure on quarterbacks. I mean, there's a reason you put up with all that there's a reason that Dallas is putting up with all that they've heard and all that everyone's heard about how he's treated women and everything else. But he's a specimen of a football player. He's going to get at the quarterback. He's going to help this Dallas defense. My question is to you, will it be enough?
No.
Keeping in mind their next opponent is Tom Brady and Bill Belichick after a bye week.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Hardy's definitely going to make an impact for Dallas on the defensive end. I mean, he's going to put pressure on the quarterback, which will only help the defense. But, I mean, as you're sitting there talking about, and the words relying on Brandon Weeden come out of your mouth, I had to hold my laughter in after having watched him for 2 years in Cleveland. And I'll be honest, I watched the end of the Cowboys and the Saints game, and I cannot believe he actually drove them down there for that tying touchdown at the end. I was completely floored by that. I thought for sure there was an interception coming based on everything I've ever seen from him. So I'll give him some credit there. I mean, before that, though, in all honesty, it looked like a typical Brandon Weeden performance. He was just over 50% completion percentage, and he really hadn't driven them to any points. I mean, other than a few field goals here and there. So it was just the typical Brandon Weeden stuff we saw in Cleveland, minus the turnovers. And he didn't have the turnover, and he drove them down there, tied the game. The Saints came back and won it. No thanks to the kicker. But yeah, so I think Hardy will definitely help them. But until they get Bryant and Romo back, they're just going to be treading water at this point.
All right. A team that's doing better than treading water with the first-year head coach and Todd Bowles is the New York Jets. Now, let me kind of put their 3-1 start in perspective. They've lost. That loss came to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles, despite all the hype surrounding Chip Kelly, they're a lower-tier team. At least in 2015, they're a lower-tier team. They've beaten the Indianapolis Colts, who were the best team that they played, and then they played just train wrecks of a situation in both the Miami Dolphins, who they defeated in London on Sunday, and the Cleveland Browns, who they beat in Week 1 after knocking Josh McCown out of the game early on. I don't think personally that this Jets 3-1 start is real, but maybe there's something special there with Todd Bowles, and they're getting Sheldon Richardson back. Can this team actually make a run in their last 12 games?
You know what? Other than New England in that division, I mean, Buffalo kind of came back to earth this week. So they have a chance to, I'd say, as a wild card. They're obviously not going to win the division, but they do have a chance as a wild card. They've got a pretty strong defense, and Sheldon Richardson coming back is only going to help that. I mean, their defense has played pretty well, and their offense has not made a lot of mistakes, which is why they've been able to win games. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick is serviceable. But that's all he is, really. He's not a superstar. He's not somebody who you'd say would lead a team to the Super Bowl, but he's definitely serviceable to get them to probably at least a 500 record based on what they're doing now. I don't know what the rest of their schedule is, but I mean, at this point, if they go 5-7, they're at 500. So I definitely think that's attainable, and maybe they'll sneak in as one of the wild card teams.
All right. Another player that's suspended that we probably wouldn't talk about except for the situation's become a little dire there in Pittsburgh. Martavis Bryant, probably a third option, probably a fourth option, maybe a fifth option when you consider Heath Miller at tight end there, Le'Veon Bell catching the ball out of the backfield. And it wouldn't matter if it was Ben Roethlisberger because he could just find a way with 5 guys off the street. Unfortunately for Pittsburgh, they did drop a game to, they could have buried Baltimore at 0-4. I think they kept Baltimore alive at home on Thursday night when they couldn't hold on to a 20-7 lead. And it was because Michael Vick couldn't find his players, couldn't play well at the end. And it's because he's on the field and not Ben Roethlisberger that you could really blame for probably 2 losses. You have to think that Roethlisberger would have given him a better chance down the stretch against the St. Louis Rams, who actually look like a pretty good football team. And then against Baltimore, you'd think that, if Ben gets out in front by 13 points in the middle of the third quarter, that game is over, especially playing at Heinz Field. But the reality is injuries injuries are part of the game. Injuries to a quarterback really affect the game negatively for the teams that lose their quarterbacks. Starting with Pittsburgh, how do you think they weather the storm without Ben Roethlisberger?
They're not going to have the same high-flying offense that they have when he's in there, obviously. I mean, they've already shown that in the last few games. I think they have once again, they're kind of in they're a better position than Dallas is, I think. So I think they'll stay better than treading water, but I think they just want to stay in the thick of things until Roethlisberger comes back, and then they can make their run.
All right. Some of the other teams, we talked about Weeden a little bit. New Orleans, Luke McCown came in, he actually won a game in relief, or did he? In relief of Drew Brees.
No, I don't think he didn't win his start. I'm not sure about the relief game.
Yeah, so I mean, and Brees bounced back. The other McCown was a starter in Cleveland, played one series in Week 1. Manziel's the rock star, comes off the bench, wins a game, but they go right back to him. Who else lost their quarterback? Let's consider the Indianapolis Colts with this Andrew Luck situation, because it doesn't look very fluid there with the Colts and Chuck Pagano.
I mean, I would say they're one of the biggest underachievers of the season so far. I don't know. I mean, they were in the AFC Championship game last year, and they didn't exactly have the toughest schedule to start the year. So I expected more out of them. And I mean, Andrew Luck has not played well this year. Usually he's the guy that's kind of been the savior for them, but this year I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know if he's been hurt all along or what the deal is, but he has not played well this year.
Okay, I'm gonna make it your call. You want to talk about the quarterback situation in Washington or Chicago?
The quarterback situation in Washington is what it is at this point. It's a three-headed monster. Just depends on the week, and I don't think any of them are really going to make a difference. So let's move on to Chicago.
All right, so Jay Cutler hasn't missed a lot of time. A lot of people have given up on him, and the Bears were really on the cusp. They traded away Jared Allen. We're seeing trades this week. We're seeing a couple trades this week, but they traded away Jared Allen to the Carolina Panthers. It was just never a good fit there. But as far as Cutler's concerned, if he loses to the Oakland Raiders, you got to consider going with Clausen, right?
I guess. I mean, at this point, I don't know which one is better. I mean, historically, Cutler's been, I would say, overrated. I mean, he has this big arm, but he hasn't really done anything in the league, to be honest. And usually the only time you're hearing about him is for negative reasons. So I don't know if that's more of a outside perception sort of thing, but the fact that he hasn't won anything at this point doesn't bode well for him.
And not at all. I completely agree with that take. All right, let's. We've kind of played both sides of the fence, talking about the NFL suspensions versus how the teams are going to fare without their players on the field. We kind of we straddled the fence again, talking about how you handle, what kind of guy you bring in as a backup to fill the void versus your big money guy at quarterback. Strictly a business issue. You're not the biggest of college football guys. I kind of give Saturday and Sunday some equal love, but I'm not sure what to think of, what's going on here with everybody. You're talking about paying college players. You're talking about guys coming out earlier than the NFL rules will allow. If you remember back, going back to like 2003, Maurice Clarett and Mike Williams suing the NFL to try to get into the draft. They find out at the last minute that they're not, so they're stuck with it. With no college eligibility and no NFL prospects for 2003. They hit the weight room. They do nothing but train for the NFL going into 2004. And neither one of those players really ever made an impact in the NFL. In fact, Maurice Clarett never suited up for a regular season game and never even had a preseason carry. Talk of that started heating up again after Jadeveon Clowney's sophomore year, that he should sit out and still be the number one pick the year after. It turns out he played. He was under the eye of scrutiny. He still ended up being the number one pick to the Houston Texans. Everything works out there. But, we've heard it with Ezekiel Elliott coming into the season. Now that Leonard Fournette's showing that he's a man among boys at LSU, at the running back position, that he could be, like Melvin Gordon, a first round pick. That it'd be, that he could play in the NFL next year and that it'd be in his best interest to sit out a year in college. What do you think of just doing away with the NFL rules, letting the NFL become like the NBA, where it's free reign for high school kids to try to make it to try to play with the big boys without playing on Saturdays first?
With the size of the players in the NFL and the speed of the game, I mean, if you look at so many players that come out, don't succeed as it is, and after 3 years of college. So just imagine them coming out either straight out of high school or even after their freshman year. I'd say 99 out of 100 players are probably destined to fail by doing that. I mean, is this more about the paycheck? That's the only thing I can think of, because I don't think they're physically ready to come out at that point, let alone emotionally ready. But I mean, it's one of those debates out there of a free society with economies and all that kind of stuff. But that we could really go a lot of ways with that. But I just think it's a whole entire different animal. I mean, even if you look at the NBA, or even Major League Baseball, with as far as that goes, how many of those young players actually do anything? It's so rare to have a LeBron James or Anthony Hardaway. Even, I mean, he was such a big deal. He came out and he did something for a few years, but then he kind of disappeared. And I mean, you can say different things for injuries and stuff like that, but I really think it comes down to they're just trying to get to their payday a little bit earlier, and I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, I can understand you're concerned about the physical toll. I mean, you're especially in the NFL, but really in any sport, you're one play away from never actually making it anyway. I mean, you could tear up your knee or have a head injury or whatever out there that prevents that from happening.
And that's exactly what happened to Marcus Lattimore. I mean, this guy was a sure thing at running back playing for Steve Spurrier down at the University of South Carolina in a game of the week sort of game. He gets hurt against the Tennessee Volunteers, and it ends his career. He gets drafted to the NFL anyway, ends up walking away from the game after not being there very long. So, I mean, there's definitely two sides to the story. You take a guy like to bring it all full circle with the Cleveland Browns. You have the 7th round pick, Ivo Ekpreolamu, who going into the 2014 season was a surefire top pick at cornerback, one of the top cornerbacks in the draft, and he ends up, losing all this value. Well, he's about a month and a half, 2 months away from collecting on an insurance policy for loss of value. He actually insured himself for loss of value against injury, and he's gonna get paid for it. I think it was a $24,000 policy that's gonna pay off millions, and he's still gonna have a chance to play in the NFL. He had a pretty gruesome injury. I mean, and he's playing for the Browns, so look at that for the long shot that it is, but. It happens. I don't agree with it. I think that the NFL needs a minor league system, and they're never gonna go that route because it's provided to them for free with this college football setup. So, it's always going to be what it is. I don't think that's going to change, and really neither side of the colleges nor the pros have any reason to do this without being coerced by a court order, which is something that could happen because there's antitrust and and there's monopolies and all kinds of legalese that you and I aren't qualified to get into. So
hey, I stayed at a Holiday Inn recently.
There you go, Chris. All right, man. Hey, we're gonna wrap it up here. Tell me a team that we need to watch in the last 13 weeks of the NFL season. Everybody but Tennessee and New England has yet to take their bye week. Who's a team that we're not paying enough attention to at this point?
Not paying enough attention to at this point. Wow, that's a good question. I mean, is there really a team in the NFL that doesn't get paid enough attention to? I mean, I would say, wow, that's a tough question. Why don't you answer that first? I'll think about it for a second.
All right, I'm going to go with the St. Louis Rams.
Okay.
I think that they've played well. They've taken down the Cardinals. They've taken down the Seahawks. A 2-2 record. They're gonna. I think that they're in the driver's seat in the best division in the National Football League, even though they're gonna trail the Cardinals by a game. But now you force the Cardinals to come into your house and beat you to gain leverage in the division. I think that I'm not a big fan of Jeff Fisher, but there's no question that he's got talent on the defensive side of the ball. All they have to do is score enough points, to let the defense win games for them.
Okay. So I'm actually going to throw a curveball here and say the Miami Dolphins. I'm really curious to see what happens with them now that they changed head coaches and see if Joe Philbin was actually holding them back. So let's see what they do now. All
right. That's a good way to go out. I don't know. I don't know that I have a rebuttal to that, but I think I should. And I think I'll come up with one in the week between now and our next show. Speaking of our show, you can get us on iTunes and anything with an RSS feed. Go to suitsandlaterals.com, part of the Four Lights FM podcast network for all the details. Catch archive shows and subscribe, download us, listen on your way into work. For Chris Green, I'm Jeff Rich. This has been Suits and Laterals.